Welcome to another news. I'm Jeff Brady. In this interview with James Bartley, we discussed the hypothesis I've outlined in a previous show. Is an alien race terraforming the Earth under the pretense of an unauthorized geoengineering operation? This originally aired on the Cosmic Switchboard show hosted by James Bartley. I provide building blocks of information and evidence to discuss the idea that non-humans are involved with ongoing climate engineering operations. We talk about the various ideas such as terraforming for alien mining operations, controlling populations with nanosensor uptake via the aerosol, and examine the consistent reports of aircraft releasing aerosol that appear as known UFO shapes. While video evidence of climate engineering aerosol operations have been documented for decades, how is it possible to blanket the majority of the known geographic landmass with particulate matter in secret and with impunity? The climate change think tanks have repeated for years the very same proposal millions witness in the sky every day. That is to spray aerosolized metals into the atmosphere to mitigate climate warming by reflecting back rays of the sun into space. Could this institutional denial simply be interpreted as, we can't talk about it because it's not us and it's not our stratospheric aerosol operation? We go now to hear the interview when I was a guest on the Cosmic Switchboard show hosted by James Bartley. James has spent years conducting paranormal field investigations in California's high desert. He's an independent historian with emphasis on military history. Let's have a listen.
So without any further ado, Jeff Brady, welcome back to the Cosmic Switchboard show.
Thank you, James. It's great to be here.
Well, give our listeners a brief background on your research into climate engineering or geoengineering and the idea you're examining and how the climate change propaganda could be a cover for a terraforming operation of Earth.
Okay, is an alien race terraforming the Earth under the pretense of an unauthorized geoengineering operation? And loosely defining terraforming would be intentionally modifying the atmosphere, its volatile components, temperature, surface, topography, or ecology to match a suitable habitat, and I would add also modifying conditions for other operations such as a temporary occupation, genetic harvesting, or underground operations such as mining. And as many of your listeners know, James, climate engineering and its chemical fallout is one of the most wicked agendas imposed on the environment and humanity. These operations are so deceptive and diabolical. Many protect themselves from learning more and remain in disbelief while an aggressive climate engineering is deployed night and day in plain sight. However, sinister operations at this magnitude couldn't happen without a network of compliant people behind the scenes from so-called environmental groups, Pentagon generals, propaganda media, NASA scientists, university professors to TV meteorologists, and some of them we've now understood through the work of geoengineeringwatch.org are under gag orders. After a number of years working with anti-geoengineering people, good people who were making a difference and bringing awareness to the aerosol operations, there was an interesting consensus. Once we all got together after an event one evening, it was early summer of 2014, and we gathered at an organizer's home to make some food and catch up. And that evening, we're quietly talking in a few groups, looking across the Long Island Sound. And these were lawyers, teachers, activist types, engineers. And a quiet, unofficial consensus was reached that there must be some type of alien, non-human involvement with this ubiquitous aerosol operation. How can it be deployed worldwide all the time in secret? How? This was quietly discussed among us, and we certainly wouldn't go public with it. Well, that night I left thinking about the time we all spend in bringing awareness to real-time climate engineering and how these operations are used to create climate change inadvertently or not, and that climate change narrative is used to heavily propagandize populations into the current restrictions being imposed now. So you have this double gatekeeping. You have the barrier of state propaganda, but you also have the alien non-human involvement behind the mask of the climate change narrative. And it's a topic and concept generally kept quiet, because if you're bringing awareness to the diabolical aerosol operation of climate engineering and you bring aliens into the mix, you've created an avenue of attack in discrediting and potentially reversing any gains made in bringing awareness. Now, that being said, I'm presenting these ideas in this interview as an organized hypothesis and food for thought. And it's important to point out also that how saturated the public domain has become with citizen journalists dispersing quality information and evidence visually and through documentation about ongoing real-time climate engineering. A lot of work has been done, and this is several years ago. I think some of your listeners will recall. And I want to mention that work of several anti-geoengineering activists who have passed on and dedicated big parts of their life and resources into exposing these diabolical operations. They're Bridget Conroy of Arizona Skywatch, Rosalind Peterson of California Skywatch, Dr. Mike Castle, Michael Murphy, Gwen Scott, author Jerry Smith, and Dr. Ilyasandra Perlingeri. I know there are more, but I want to acknowledge them right now. And in my opinion, it was so effective what they did and what we all did. There was such massive disinformation launched, a massive disinformation campaign launched to counter it. And that's usually your indicator of how effective you are. Your listeners may recall for several years between 2009 and maybe 2015, gatekeeper outlets published articles probably in the hundreds about climate engineering, playing semantics, or outright denying real-time use of weather control technology while claiming to be researching it as a contingency to climate change, likely caused by the very operations, of course. Now, that time space was about 2009 to 2015, just a swarm of articles and information came out within media outlets. Now, as this aggressive real-time climate engineering continues altering what we perceive to be natural weather worldwide, it also facilitates disaster capitalism models. Part of the reason there's so much deception and bitter contention swirling around this topic is because it's likely a multi-layered terraforming operation. And as part of this transformation, Terraform, man-made microwave radiation frequencies dispersed, such as current 4G and 5G, that interfere with the Schumann resonance, a natural frequency of the planet which is resonating between their surface and the atmosphere. And the Schumann resonance is also known to perfectly match the human brain frequency.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And these activists that you mentioned a moment ago, have they come to a similar hypothesis that perhaps there is a non-human element behind this, or is that something that just you and the people at that meeting had independently come up with?
It's something that people are reluctant to speak of, especially people in the public eye or have positions and jobs that they work with people and their faces on a website somewhere. People are afraid to be ridiculed in that way. And I understand that. It's not easy.
Yes, it's a rock and a hard place scenario, because if you follow the information in an unbiased manner and you take it to where it leads you, like you pointed out, the very information that you find, for those who are not familiar or up to speed with this level of understanding, it could tend to bring discredit upon the whole venture. So, if one wants to ensure that there is widespread knowledge of this, then they have to walk a fine line between, well, how far do I go? What do I tell them? And, remaining in integrity. Uh, Now, this is a ubiquitous operation, and it's been allowed to continue in plain sight, upheld by the flimsiest of deceptions. When anyone can see the activity being conducted overhead, what are some of the ruses or deceptions, or the means by which this deception is being maintained?
Yeah, thanks for asking that, James. It seems like something here is beyond the control of the cryptocracy, or whatever you want to call them, the cabal. And one way to cause a smokescreen is a campaign of constant cognitive dissonance. The well-funded lies surrounding the topics of climate change and climate engineering are the reason why the topic has been revisited for the last decade on the radio show and other news that I've hosted. Video evidence of climate engineering aerosol operations being conducted in the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and many other countries have been witnessed by millions of people. However, there is an attitude of willful ignorance among climate scientists and researchers that needs to be understood on many levels. What's clever and pernicious here is that the very topic of being environmentally mindful has been hijacked. The reality is anti-geoengineering activists care deeply about the health of the environment, and that's why they sound the alarm about the human health and environmental effects of spraying soft metals, such as aluminum, into the atmosphere and using electromagnetic technology to heat and control weather system boundaries and jet streams. The truth is, most people have known climate engineering is causing extreme weather and that it's being used to further a false green agenda that has already started to erode human rights and be used to lock in a dystopian surveillance state. It's taking form in the UK and now Canada with illegal laws limiting travel. This level of information won't be properly broadcast. Even if it is through some accident, it will likely have a minor effect. Again, most articles written about geoengineering in the last 8 years, and recently, James, in the New York Times, will patronize the reader with a circular narrative offered by captured scientists, usually from institutions such as Cornell, Stanford, and Harvard. Years ago, people such as David Keith and other scientists were openly discussing geoengineering as a last resort to mitigate the warming of the climate using soft metals such as aerosolized aluminum to be a reflective layer in the upper atmosphere. However, the claims are these operations are only contingencies and haven't been deployed. David Keith's group, I think it's called the Keith Group, is partially funded by the Gates Foundation. He repeats the mantra that geoengineering could work if we were to deploy, but we need to be careful, etc. The full denial of the ongoing aerosol operations are on his site. And this is what it reads. We are not now involved in outdoor experimentation, though we are indeed actively developing proposals for field experiments. This experiment will proceed only if it is conducted in a fully transparent and public manner, and only if it passes a comprehensive independent study safety review. The experimental plans, operations, and results will be publicly available and freely usable, no patenting. And then it gets into the chemtrail conspiracy theory. This is on his site. Because of the apparent similarities between the proposed implementation methods for albedo modification, such as injecting reflective particles into the stratosphere, and the alleged methods for producing, quote, chemtrails, some people have linked the notion of chemtrails to the study of albedo modification. There is no evidence for the existence of chemtrails. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The claim that there is a large-scale secret program to spray materials from aircraft is extraordinary, yet all the evidence we have seen to date has been very weak. The most common claim is simply that aircraft contrails look, quote, different without any comparative analysis. And listen to this sentence, James. This is as convincing as saying that alien beings walk among us in disguise as people because some people act very strangely. I know it's a joke and they're mocking people, but it's still in the subconscious and in the zeitgeist.
Well, just to interject for a second, they may have to revise that because in the recently released national intelligence findings, whatever they call it for 2022, they postulate in that official government document that aliens already are among us now, right?
Wow.
We know they've been around for a long time, but
Right.
so it's an example of speaking with a forked tongue, speaking out of both sides of the mouth simultaneously. But please continue.
And just one last paragraph here. On their site, this is the Keith Group site debunking what they call chemtrails or the existence of chemtrails. If there really were a large-scale program dumping material from aircraft at the scale described, there would have to be a large operating program to manufacture, load, and disperse materials. If such a program existed at the scale required to explain the claimed amount of chemtrails, it would require thousands or perhaps tens of thousands of people. It would be extraordinarily hard to keep such a program secret because it would be so easy for a single individual in the program to reveal it using leaked documents, photographs, or actual hardware. Well, I believe that has happened already. But again, this kind of supports non-humans being involved in the operation. What the researchers at Geoengineering Watch found flying through a trail left by a chemtrail aircraft catching the particles in the trail to be tested, they found the soft metals were nanoparticles such as graphene oxide, the same component put into the poison jab. When honestly evaluated, the experimental gene therapy shot was forced onto the population from a corrupt power, again tracking back to the Gates Foundation and the cult known as the WEF. And if you've done a little research on the WEF, you've seen they like wearing their robes and their space age looking clothing. And to this day, real-time climate engineering remains the most secretive topic worldwide. No elected politician has directly responded to implicit questions about real-time climate engineering operations conducted in the lower atmosphere that millions of people are witnessing. None. How can that be? And just to reiterate, as unearthed by geoengineeringwatch.org, NOAA and related government agency contractors are known to be under gag order. They can't speak about the massive ongoing climate engineering, but I suspect it goes deeper than that and into an alien terraforming agenda. And you may remember John Kerry recently saying, I think it was at the Davos event this year, regarding climate change, he says, quote, I mean, it's so almost extraterrestrial to think about saving the planet, end quote.
He also says something to the effect that the representatives that make up the WEF mob or whatever organization that was at Davos, that extraterrestrials had sent them there specifically to do that job, or words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing. So he's implying that they are this chosen group of people, this priesthood, if you will, that have been delegated by aliens to effect changes which will combat this woo-woo climate change fear, which they're imposing on everyone. And just to make a quick point, the hypocrisy is stunning because the abuse meted out to Graham Hancock and others for their findings, which I feel are valid, that this notion of catastrophism is the norm on this planet rather than uniformitarianism, where everything stays the same geologically, stays the same for millions and millions of years, whereas the geological proof and the accounts and lore from cultures the world over strongly suggest that, and the archaeological proof strongly suggests that this planet is subject to periodic, cyclical, celestially driven cataclysms. Now, what are celestially driven cataclysms if not radical climate change? So they deny that Graham Hancock his information is valid, but in essence, they're denying climate change themselves. It just shows the utter hypocrisy of the people or the beings that we're dealing with.
And they very well could be ambassadors for non-humans who are, involved at those higher levels, orchestrating things.
And the fact that Carey himself is the skull and bonesman, the occult rituals he and his mob get into behind closed doors, there's nothing remotely human about some of the activities that they get up to. Now, as far as some of the anomalies are concerned, can you talk a bit about the speed, velocity of some of these chemtrail generating airplanes and other anomalies which suggest that there's something more going on than simple airliners or air tankers converted for such purposes?
Right, and that points to what was mentioned in the Keith group. Like many skywatchers, I've caught on video UFOs flying near or in the same direction as the spray aircraft, and also video of UFOs flying right at these aircraft that are releasing aerosol. And you can call them planes, but it's been shown for years now that these aircraft glitch out and take the form of round illuminated shapes and wingless tubes. They become transparent, and I've caught one on video taking the form of a disc. They're morphing in shape all while spraying. And that right there is a huge existential threat that causes many people to quickly dismiss the topic. Okay, so you have an aircraft spraying, but then it's not an aircraft, but it's still spraying something. People don't want to talk about that. Another significant factor often overlooked is the speed of the aircraft, as you mentioned, releasing persistent aerosol trails. It can at times appear traveling far beyond the standard passenger jet speed of 550 miles an hour, 550, 600 miles an hour. These aircraft appear to be moving at least double that speed. Not only that, they're traveling in pairs, in threes, and at times caught on video in attack formation, leaving these persistent trails, not regular contrails. And when you watch these aircraft through binoculars over hours at a time, you will see them seemingly appear out of nowhere. And of course, that could be, from turning on the spraying devices and suddenly appearing visible. But keep in mind, James, these aircraft can become invisible. I've caught it on video. I was also told, James, that the speed of the aircraft was significant to a certain dispersal pattern and a certain particulate aerosol. So you have to factor that in, when you're looking at the wild speed of these aircraft. That doesn't mean, of course, they're of alien origin, but this anomaly adds to the non-conventionality of the aerosol aircraft. It's also known that technology exists to conceal the aircraft's visibility in the sky, and this could be causing distortions. If there are holograms concealing an unconventional spacecraft, then you may see the distortions as the object is moving away from you, because the light reflecting from the false image will take longer to absorb into the camera's sensor, allowing it to pick up anomalies. So that time delay is valuable for revealing fake aircraft on video. And then you look at the cost of keeping tens of thousands or more aircraft in the sky, releasing aerosolized soft metals constantly now for at least 20 years worldwide. These operations have been documented in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, United States, Europe, and the UK region. Are they spraying heavily in other regions, such as South and Central America, China, and Russia? I haven't seen a lot of footage of that, but who knows?
I'd be particularly interested in knowing, and there has been some information suggesting this, that even in relatively remote or quite remote places, like out in the middle of the ocean and out in remote places of desert and mountainous terrain where there's sparsely populated regions, this is still going on. Now, what are your thoughts about that? Have you looked much into that aspect of it?
Yes, specifically over the Pacific Ocean near the west coast of North America. And I've seen many satellite images of evidence of persistent trails and a lot of shenanigans going on, modifying the weather fronts. And we'll get into that a little bit more, I think later, but that's part of a terraforming operation. And, not necessarily for, the existence of a particular alien life form to be able to sustain itself, but maybe to modify particular areas of land masses to get into mining or things like that.
Can you talk about the interview you did with Italian skywatcher and geoengineering researcher known as Tanker Enemy?
Some of your listeners may remember this YouTuber from Italy. He changed his name on YouTube. I think it's to his name. It's Italian. I should have remembered it, but I don't. But I remember him as Tanker Enemy, a very thorough researcher, and I think he was a musician and photographer. He ran a photography business and could not ignore what was going on in the skies above Italy. In July of 2010, I sent him a request to interview him about what was going on. Of course, he didn't speak English, so we did it through text, and I translated his response from Italian to English. So I'll go through some of that now. Aircrafts engaged in the clandestine aerosol operations are always without identifying brands and are invisible to civilian radar. So I ask Tanker Enemy, do you suspect aliens are involved with these spraying projects? Is this a terraforming project? This is back in 2010. And he responds, maybe we should think to interdimensional creatures than aliens. The terraforming seems to be implemented to make the environment suitable for living beings whose DNA is based on silicon rather than carbon. It is possible to establish the following scenarios. Hostile beings, allies of the armies and world governments, are combated, even if ineffectually and sporadic way, by forces who want to safeguard the planet. This is translated again from Italian to English. And then he refers to these balls of light, which often are observed or disturb the chemical flights. And I've referred to those earlier. And so I ask him, you are among a few who have filmed very strange activity. What is the strangest thing you've seen in the skies? What is the strangest thing you've filmed? He responds, the strangest phenomena that we were able to film is recorded in this video, and that link is no longer valid, but it shows a Boeing 757 entering a cloud and then disappearing inside of it And in those moments, you can discern these balls of light coming out of the cloud while the aircraft disappears. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to In Other News. I'm Jeff Brady. We're hearing an interview that I did on the Cosmic Switchboard show hosted by James Bartley. And I answer the question, is an alien race terraforming the Earth under the pretense of an unauthorized geoengineering operation?
Jeff, what is it that's being sprayed?
James, recent analysis by Geoengineering Watch include nanoparticles along with the familiar range of soft metals, including barium, strontium, and aluminum. A scientist named J. Marvin Herndon concluded that the full spectrum analysis of what's falling out of the sky from these operations is analogous to coal fly ash. In the past, researchers analyzed the fallout content that include a range of viruses, desiccated blood cells, and ultimately this is a vector to essentially wipe out or debilitate any specific species on the ground. And there's also the Morgellons issue related to that. Our biology is being negatively affected by this intrusion into our lives. And you may remember the researcher involved with this named Clifford Carnicom. He warned whether it will be 15 or 50 years, that is likely also a form of terraforming the human race or inhabitability of entities within people. And that's another serious issue. It's been happening very slowly, but something tells me that more people are waking up to this agenda as it accelerates in its pace. And many years ago, James, there was a site called Data Asylum. It's been taken down. And I remember I copied some text from it that was interesting, and I don't know if he's an insider. I just don't know. But people know one of the more destructive results here of what they're doing is blocking the sun. And he writes, this is a standard reason given to fools in the government. We need to secretly stop global warming. So keep it a secret that we're spraying. Global warming is a catch-all con for everyone in the government. Okay. And then he writes, blocking the sun again. A reduction in sunlight across the planet works well to decrease or manipulate crop yield slightly. It's part of the requirement to engineer a food crisis and bring in a famine. And then he writes, you can dismiss that. Then he writes, superheating the atmosphere. Well, in order to create earthquakes and steer hurricanes, well, we know that's going on. The atmosphere needs to be more conductive for electricity. So installations such as HAARP can work their magic. So the aerosol operations spray barium and aluminum, among other things, to create a more conductive upper atmosphere. And then he references films. And then he talks about health erosion. As a side effect, everyone's health and immune system becomes slightly compromised. This is usually not an issue for most healthy people. However, older people on average will die sooner, and any health complication is slightly more likely to be fatal. And this is a side effect of spraying. He references climate modification to hurt crops or keep skies clear for major events, such as, a Super Bowl or the Olympics or things like that. And then he gets into nanofiber propagation. Again, okay, this is back in 2011 when this was written, and Geoengineering Watch, they just came out with their footage of finding nanoparticulates in the trail. This was 3 years ago. So whoever did this, knew what was going on. And so he calls this nanofiber propagation, and he writes to universally install, and he calls it something called BioAPI in everyone. They need to spray nanofibers. These fibers cannot be put into the food supply or given in some other way. The uptake across populations would take forever and not propagate very effectively. It's much easier to spray everyone like an insect because it's happening to everyone the universal herd mentality of the masses then justifies it. And then he starts talking about this payload of nanofibers that would otherwise be compromised by the sun or atmosphere or not make it into the body, such as viral RNA code, metals such as aluminum and nanocomponents. The fibers are quite harmless as everyone has them. And then he goes into talking about phase 1 and phase 2, which you've probably already heard. He references films, also reference phase 1 and phase 2, and that includes a movie titled Surrogates that came out in 2009, another film titled Control Factor that came out in 2003, and another film titled Gamer, which came out in 2009. And I've only seen the clips here of some of these, but they do reference some of these phases. So phase 1, everyone on the planet is affected and involved in this phase. Everyone to some extent has the nanofibers within the body cavity and therefore wired. Side effects include a clicking sound from within the skull and basic annoying body complications such as aching joints. This phase provides complete remote control of your speech and thought patterns through suggestion, partially subconscious. I guess, he writes, about 99% of the populace of the entire planet has this phase complete. And phase 2 must be triggered by nano trigger bots, and it's extreme. It completely compromises your health and can do anything from kill you or simply monitor you. This phase cannot be forced on you like phase 1. This involves multiple nanosensors from ocular to heart, everything in between. So they can put, implants in, I guess, behind your eye, stuff like that. He writes, I figure about 2% of the population has gone through this phase. If this phase is triggered in you, they consider you evil, as shown within the media examples page of this site. So he's referencing videos that he has up. The site's long gone. This is from 2010, 11, somewhere in that time frame. He writes, you must do something to trigger this phase, including eating cheap red meat, kissing specific people, and using specific corporate healthcare beauty products. That goes on. It's not very pleasant material. And again, that's from the site called Data Asylum. It's no longer online. I think they have a Twitter account. To me, this level of biological interference using nanotechnology to disrupt and monitor humans is highly suspicious and, to me, connected to non-human involvement.
Yes, I would agree. And the tone, the tenor of his writings suggests that he's in favor of this. Am I correct in that assumption?
It's more like informative to me.
Uh-huh. Kind of like the Deagle report that all these people are going to be dead within a certain amount of time. It's just throwing it out there. You attended conferences where you met several scientists, and among them was Ken Caldera, and you did a 2003 documentary entitled Climate Engineers, where you traveled to Palo Alto. Palo Alto is a big-time Illuminati center, Stanford Research Institute, all that is over there. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yes. James, at the time, I didn't know Palo Alto was known to be that type of area. I had no idea. All I knew was geoengineering scientists were meeting to speak among each other privately, and then they were going to do a public presentation that could be recorded. And I recorded it and spoke with them. And this was for a radio documentary titled Climate Engineers, War Profit Survival in 2003. And I spoke with Ken Caldera, a well-known geoengineering expert, who told me he and several scientists had a meeting in a room at Lawrence Livermore Labs and tried to come up with ways to use the Earth's natural forces as weapons. He said, we could put pathogens in a cloud and have it rain out in an area as big as the former Soviet Union. He confirmed that it's a weapon and can be used against human populations. And remember, superheating the atmosphere in order to create earthquakes and steer hurricanes. Many of us now see these anomalies associated with this on radar and satellite maps. Another reason I suspect there's a non-human component to the ubiquitous aerosol operations, is that it's more secret than aliens and UFOs. The narrative of those agencies and think tanks, like I just mentioned, proposing the very projects such as stratospheric aerosol operations that millions have witnessed in the sky, they're saying it's not happening. And they are proposing these operations, but they're not happening in real time. And that's how they're messing with people's psychology. And that's why they're able to do it without really anyone saying anything, or most people keeping quiet. I'm not trying to make an airtight case here regarding non-human involvement with climate engineering. Again, I suspect there's a non-human involvement in these operations. You have the aircraft glitching out when caught on video. They're spraying this horrible stuff over the majority of the known geographic landmass. There's no bigger project than this to date, and through hundreds of millions poured into propaganda and misinformation campaigns, it's kept out of the public domain. Still, we can't fathom the magnitude of this project. It's beyond massive, and that tells you right there, this is everything to the cryptocracy and the entities above that. If you control the sun, you control the food. If you control the climate and can engineer, quote, natural disasters, you control the population. Can humans be capable of this tyranny, this psychopathy? Of course. But at this magnitude, with this level of discretion and organization, maybe not without the aid of some outside supernatural force.
You mentioned that graphene and nanotechnology were some of the known ingredients of the chemtrails based on analysis. To me, that's a direct linkage to the rollout the last 2 years, because the same or similar ingredients are found in the toxic stabs. This, to me, it further buttresses the argument that there's ultimately a non-human origin and impetus behind this, because it's one thing for elites to say, okay, we're a cut above the masses, we're a cut above the sheeple, but to be able to implement uh, covertly and overtly a global planet scale agenda, and both of these seemingly unconnected agendas have some of the very same ingredients, the graphene, the nanotechnology, what have you. And we've seen the baneful effects of that just in the recent past. Now, I'm assuming that the graphene has been an ingredient in the chemtrails for some time. So it's quite possible humanity at large, and for that matter, all living life forms on this planet, had been prepped with graphene, if you will, long before the rollouts of the last 2 years.
I agree. We're certainly holding a lot of this chemical makeup in our bodies, and there are ways to purge it out. Drinking distilled water, I think you need a gallon a day of distilled water for months and months and months to begin to move that material out of the body. And also organic chaparral, the herb chaparral, Chapparel. And you have to be careful with that. There's an FDA warning on it. I think it's half a teaspoon twice a month, something like that. And you certainly have to drink a gallon of water on that day. But that will purge impurities out of the body. That'll help. Now, you reference, how can this be done? You know, I had this interview with your colleague and a friend of mine, Carissa Conti, who had gone into the usual great detail that she does in her writing about how is it possible people in these institutions were lockstep into implementing, the poison jab into the populations without flinching, lockstep with the propaganda. So she points that out, and she suspects, there's a hybrid human, hybrid alien human element here. They walk among us, basically.
Can you talk a bit about how a mining agenda may be fulfilled, that the climate engineering, the aerosol spraying may provide some form of cover. And just for a little context, the notion that non-human beings have been mining Earth, this goes back into antiquity. Native cultures around the world have spoken about this. The Hopi and other Native American tribes in the Southwest spoke of the ant people, which, when they describe what these ant people look like, they sound alarmingly similar to greys or insectoid beings. And the reason they call them the ant people, because they always seemed to the Native Americans to be digging tunnel systems and going in and out of the ground and flying their craft in and out of the ground. Could you talk a bit about the mining aspect, perhaps, that may be part and parcel of the geoengineering effort?
Years ago, I interviewed a woman named Allison Cruz who was filming incredible footage of UFOs morphing into conventional human-made aircraft at night, complete with the blinking FAA lights. This is in western Pennsylvania. Lots of hills, ridge lines, and she was filming those UFOs in this area where there are many abandoned coal mines. James, they were mimicking planes, right? UFOs mimicking planes. So we know they can do that. So what's preventing these entities and UFOs from terraforming the planet disguised as planes? Okay, I want to keep that going. This is consistent also with what Ellen Crystal wrote in her book titled Silent Invasion, in terms of how aliens will use existing mine structures to access minerals, etc. Who knows? Maybe they created the mines to begin with, and humans inherited them, and humans continue to dig them out. Just to give you a quick example, in Chapter 9 of Ellen Crystal's book titled Silent Invasion, this is Aliens Underground. Now she's talking about an area near Pine Bush, New York, and I've been there. I filmed UFOs there. I filmed UFOs shifting into planes that look with FAA lights, but it's not quite complete. There are glitches in their ability to do that. So here is part of this chapter. Everything fell into place. Until then, I hadn't figured out why the ships were landing in the same fields and forest areas night after night. The ships were always in the woods, in exactly the same place month after month, year after year, but we still couldn't get to them. The terrain was too rough. The drilling in the woods, in the middle of the night no less. I'd been there with other people. We'd heard it, but we couldn't find its source. The noise seemed to be everywhere we walked. Now the reason was clear. It was coming from under us. I said to Dale and her husband, "Would you tell me what in the hell is going on?" They told me a story about the Earth being up for grabs by many extraterrestrial races who have come to claim a stake. I have received reports from around the country about underground drilling in woods during the night and electrical generators operating in areas where no one is doing construction. And she writes, in fact, the National Enquirer ran a headline story about an alien base in Dulce, New Mexico. This is published in '88, by the way, saying it was jointly staffed by aliens and the CIA. The alleged source of the information was Leonard Stringfield, a respected ufologist, and he protested that story was based on comments he made in a public lecture. What could they be doing? I asked myself. I was sure they were drilling and had machinery operating. Dale and Mark told me the aliens were mining beryllium, zirconium, and titanium. I pursued this clue via library research. Amazingly, I learned that the three metals were not only rare, but were found only in small Asian countries. I nearly flipped out on this. What was going on? We checked the fields the next day. We saw no evidence of mining. Occasionally, some of the local residents found diggings on their property, diggings large enough to have been made by machinery, but where no construction had been authorized by the owners. All the land is privately owned by farmers who plow and plant. Some ground markings were there, but it was as if whatever occurred at night was removed or camouflaged against curious people like us. Again, I want to add that I've filmed at night in this area and have caught on video UFOs mimicking plane, the very same phenomena that we're talking about. And another interesting case, James, I recently heard when interviewing Kawani Lapsaritis, author of Psychic Bigfoot and Hyperdimensional Bigfoot. And it's an eyewitness account of a hunter camped on a mountainside who heard machinery and drilling sounds at night in this remote area. He tried to get closer to investigate, but a Bigfoot was monitoring the perimeter. The Bigfoot was essentially working security for the alien mining operation, keeping curious humans out of the area. And back in 2010, I was interviewing the late Rosalind Peterson about geoengineering. Her site is still up, I believe, agriculturedefensecoalition.org. One thing she mentioned was the potential of climate engineering operations being used to melt permafrost near the Arctic Circle to access minerals and other subterranean treasures. Again, another potential case of mining with unknown aircraft, climate engineering to change the weather, lace the atmosphere with conductive particulates, then use EMF to bend the jet stream and heat up the area. You then have your melting of permafrost or ice and access to mining, and eventually lay the blame of climate change at the doorstep of regular people. One related phenomenon I was able to catch on video are UFOs charging at the aircraft, spraying, and I've got these on video. And the rest are UFOs near commercial aircraft that are spraying. And that's another issue right there. But regarding the UFOs and spray plane interaction, that's real and significant and one of the most important issues to evaluate yet. As with all this information we're discussing, there's not much of this data in the public domain. But back to the question, is an alien race terraforming this Earth under the pretense of an unauthorized geoengineering operation? Again, defining terraforming here by intentionally modifying the atmosphere, its volatile components, temperature, surface topography, or ecology to match a suitable habitat. But I would also modify conditions here for other operations as mining.
Yes, I would agree. There was another website that's since been taken down, Joseph P. Skipper's great Mars Anomalies website. That was yanked. Been a while now. But using accessible overhead imagery, he found all kinds of anomalies, not just on Mars and on the moon using those software programs, but on Earth itself. For example, he was able to identify a clear undersea mining operation off the coast of the west coast of South America. It was a huge mining operation, and then he also found imagery which shows mining operations going on at the bottom of the Marianas Trench in the Pacific Ocean, the North Pacific. Now that's got to be something like 25 miles down. How any kind of conventional submersible would be able to survive those crushing pressures is beyond me. And the imagery suggests that it may still be ongoing, that not only had it been ongoing for who knows how long, but the operations may have been ongoing because it seemed that the imagery was showing that the work was expanding, that it was getting larger, right? So, and that was all yanked. And he also found in the Antarctic huge areas covered over with like a aquamarine kind of green tinted glass, for lack of a better term, just like hundreds of square kilometers of just this green glass there on which should be the tundra, right? So there's just a lot of anomalies going on, and to me, it definitely suggests that there is some non-human element behind this. That all the things combined, because it's the same planet, so there has to be some interrelationship between the medical institutions, the corrupted scientific institutions, and what's going on in the skies above us. And I think it's really germane at this point because the the news cycle, and we know how the news cycle works. Let's just bombard people with climate change, fear mongering that could last for days, weeks, or months, or years. Now we're getting these scare stories of balloons and, oh, another unidentified object was shot down. So we're having all of that come to the consciousness again. And the way they've worked it out, because everything has to do, as you know, Jeff, with splintering, fragmenting consciousness, muting consciousness. So there is a disconnect between what is happening now, or what is purported to be happening, and all the stuff that's gone on, like everything you've talked about thus far. Everything you've talked about thus far in this program is out of sight, out of mind. To the viewing audience, all they're getting is scary woo-woo stories about balloons and unidentified objects being shot down. So the fact that they're announcing this and they're speaking of it as in a matter of fact way, without reference to what has gone on before, right? The huge voluminous stacks of data amassed from airline pilots, military personnel, civilians, about the existence of non-human life forms here on this planet.
We just heard part of an interview with James Bartley and myself, and we discussed the hypothesis I've outlined in a previous show is an alien race terraforming the Earth under the pretense of an unauthorized geoengineering operation. That's going to do it for In Other News. I'm Jeff Brady. Visit inothernewsradio.com for archives and more information about the guests.